They say a river never forgets what it swallows. In the quiet fishing village of Olowo, where the river was both life and death, that saying was about to prove true. Abiola was known across the village as a man who worked with his hands and his heart. At 35, he had built his name not through wealth or pride, but through sweat, fishing nets, and the laughter he shared with his wife, Abimbola. Together, they were more than husband and wife. They were a team. She swam like no other woman in the village, strong in the water, fearless, and she knew the business of fishing as well as any man. At dawn, they would push out the canoe together, and by noon, she would be beside him, scaling fish with quick fingers and a smile that seemed to make the river softer. Theirs was a marriage people pointed at and said, "That is how God intended it." Even the old women selling peppers at the market would gossip kindly, saying, "Abiola and Abimbola's love has no cracks." But where there is light, shadows hide. The shadow in Abiola's life had always been his elder brother, Femi. On the outside, Femi seemed supportive. At 40, he was the one who handled the market end of their business. Abiola trusted him with the records, the money, the sales. Femi had a way with buyers, and with his tall, commanding figure and silver tongue, he often secured the best prices. People thought it was loyalty, the way Femi stood by his younger brother. But inside Femi's chest burned a bitterness that no one saw. He envied the happiness Abiola shared with Abimbola. He envied the respect Abiola commanded. And most of all, he envied the fact that despite his own age, Femi had no family, no closeness, no joy to call his own. Greed mixed with jealousy until it soured his heart completely. Abimbola, with her sharp eyes, was the first to notice that something was wrong. Day after day, she noticed how the money Abiola brought home did not match the baskets of fish they sold. At first, she thought it was market changes. But one afternoon, while tidying the small wooden stall they used, she found something tucked under a pile of old sales records, a little brown notebook. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Line after line, figures were scribbled. Dates, sales, amounts, and then deductions. Huge amounts missing. The sums did not lie. For months, maybe even years, Femi had been stealing. Thousands of naira gone, drained quietly while he smiled in their faces. Abimbola's heart pounded. That evening, she waited for Femi. She confronted him privately, away from Abiola, her voice firm though her hands shook. "Femi, I know what you've done. I have seen your notebook. You have been stealing from your own brother. I will not keep this secret. Abiola deserves the truth." Femi's eyes, dark and sharp, glared at her. For a moment, he said nothing, only clenched his fists. Then a slow smile crept across his lips. "Be careful, Abimbola. Some truths can drown a family." His words chilled her, but she stood her ground. She walked away, her mind made up. Tomorrow, she would tell Abiola everything. But tomorrow never came. That evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the river gold, Abimbola carried her bundle of clothes to the waterbank. Washing clothes at the river was her routine, something ordinary, something safe. The water shimmered peacefully, the same river that had always been her friend. She knelt, dipped the first cloth, and began scrubbing. She did not hear Femi's footsteps at first. He came silently, his shadow long behind her. His heart thundered in his chest, not from fear, but from decision. This was his chance. If Abimbola told Abiola, everything he had built through lies would collapse. He would lose his brother's trust, his position, his stolen wealth. He could not allow it. "Abimbola," he said softly, almost kindly. She looked up, startled, the wet cloth still in her hands. Before she could speak, before she could rise, Femi lunged. He grabbed her shoulders and shoved her with all his strength into the deep, rushing part of the river. The water swallowed her scream. Abimbola was a strong swimmer, but shock and the heavy current betrayed her. She fought, arms flailing, head rising once, twice. "Femi," she gasped, eyes wide with horror and disbelief. But he only stood there, watching, chest heaving, as the river dragged her further away. She kicked, clawed, but her dress tangled, her energy drained, and the water pulled her under. In the fading light, her figure disappeared, the ripples closing over her. The river had claimed her. Femi stood frozen, breathing hard, his hands shaking, not from guilt, but from the enormity of what he had just done. He looked around. No one had seen. The only witness was the river itself. Slowly, he turned and walked back toward the village, leaving only Abimbola's washing bowl overturned at the bank. By morning, the villagers found her clothes by the riverside. The bowl floated near the edge. People shook their heads and muttered, "Ah, poor Abimbola. She must have slipped." No one suspected murder. The river had taken many lives before. It was not unusual. Abiola wept like a child when the news reached him. His cries echoed through the village, breaking the hearts of even the hardest fishermen. He searched the waters for days, calling her name, but her body never surfaced. Femi stood by his side, his face painted with sorrow, his voice heavy with false grief. He held his brother's shoulders, saying, "It is fate, Abiola. The river gives, and the river takes." Inside, relief coiled in his belly like a secret snake. And so, Abimbola was gone, or so it seemed. But the river never forgets. 5 years passed, but for Abiola, each day felt like the same endless night. The river that once gave him joy had become his silent enemy. It had swallowed his wife, his partner, his reason to smile. From the morning he woke to the night he lay on his mat, the absence of Abimbola pressed against his chest like a stone. In the first months after her drowning, neighbors had gathered around him. They cooked for him, urged him to eat, reminded him that life must continue. But grief is a lonely thing. Over time, the neighbors drifted back to their own lives. The village market filled again with noise, laughter, and bargaining. Children splashed in the shallow river. Women sang as they pounded yam. Only Abiola's compound remained quiet, his face drawn, his eyes hollow. He fished just enough to survive. Once, his canoe had returned full, baskets overflowing. Now, he threw his net without strength, without care, dragging in whatever the river allowed. Some days he returned with only a handful of fish. Other days with none. He ate little, spoke less, and his once strong body began to shrink. Through it all, Femi remained by his side, or so it seemed. To the villagers, Femi was a loyal elder brother. He managed the sales at the market, handled Abiola's earnings, and kept the books. Whenever people asked about Abiola's state, Femi would sigh and shake his head. "Grief has swallowed my brother. I only pray he finds peace." But behind that mask of sorrow, Femi's greed had only deepened. He had drained most of Abiola's savings in those 5 years. Each time Abiola handed him fish to sell, only half the money returned. The rest slipped into Femi's pockets, feeding his secret wealth. The signs of his prosperity were everywhere. His once crumbling hut was replaced with a new brick house, painted bright. He bought expensive cloth, bright Ankara patterns, heavy Igbotas stitched with gold thread. He began walking through the market with a swagger, carrying himself like a man who had mastered both the river and the land. When neighbors asked where his money came from, he laughed. "Ah, I have my own small business. The work of my hands is paying off." But whispers began to rise. The fishermen noticed how poor Abiola looked, still struggling with patched nets, while Femi grew fatter, richer. "Is it not strange," one said, "that the man who sells fish is rich, but the man who catches it has nothing?" Another muttered, "The river is wicked. It took Abiola's wife, and now it is draining his strength." Yet Abiola never suspected. His trust in Femi was complete. To him, his brother was the only anchor left in his broken life. If Femi said the market was slow, Abiola believed it. If Femi said prices had dropped, Abiola accepted it. Grief had blinded him, and Femi used that blindness well. But though he lived half a life, Abiola never abandoned Abimbola. Every evening, he walked to the riverbank and sat on the sand where she used to wash clothes. He spoke to the water as if it could hear him. "Abimbola, my love, are you at peace?" And so he lived like a man walking in two worlds, half in the present, half in the shadow of the past. Meanwhile, the village gossips grew louder. They compared the two brothers. "See how Femi shines like the midday sun, while Abiola fades like an old moon. Something is not right." But no one dared accuse Femi openly. His sharp tongue and growing influence in the market silenced them. For Abiola, time had become an enemy. Each year passed without color, without joy. He carried his nets to the river, cast them weekly, and returned home to his empty mat. Only the grave he built for Abimbola gave him a reason to keep breathing. A mound of earth under a tree near their compound, marked with a small stone. Every day, he laid flowers there, or a fish, or even just a palmful of water. He whispered, I am still here, Abimbola. I am waiting. 5 years. 5 long years of emptiness. The villagers thought his life would end in that silence, that he would fade away slowly, leaving nothing behind but the memory of his devotion. But the river had not finished its story, and deep within its waters, where the currents twisted and secrets slept, something stirred. The same river that had swallowed Abimbola was about to return her, though not in the way anyone expected. That morning, 5 years after Abimbola's disappearance, Abiola pushed his canoe into the water with the same emptiness that had lived inside him since the day he lost her. He rowed slowly into the deep part of the river, the very place where Abimbola once loved to swim, the same place where she had vanished. It was not intentional. His hands guided the paddle without thought, as if grief itself wanted to bring him closer to her memory. Abimbola, he whispered, his eyes misty as he dropped his net into the water. Are you still watching me from somewhere? The net sank into the depths, pulling heavy against the rope. At first, Abiola thought it was a large catch. Maybe the river was finally pitying him with a blessing. He braced his legs and tugged with all his strength. The net resisted, straining, heavy as though it had caught a rock or a tree branch. But slowly, painfully, he dragged it up, the rope cutting into his palms. When the net broke the surface, his breath caught in his throat. It was not a tree, not a rock. Inside the dripping mesh was a figure. A woman, her hair tangled with river weed, her skin pale, her body limp. For a moment, Abiola's heart stopped. Abimbola, he whispered, barely daring to believe his own eyes. He dropped to his knees, after removing her from the net. Water poured from her dress, her limbs cold against his arms. He shook her gently. No, no, it cannot be. His tears mixed with the river spray. Then, her eyes opened. They were not the same eyes he had once known. Once, they had been bright, full of laughter. Now, they held a strange depth, like the river itself was staring through them. They glowed faintly, and when she spoke, her voice was a whisper carried by the wind. Abiola, he gasped, stumbling back, his mind reeling. No, this is madness. I am dreaming. I have lost my mind at last. He pressed his palms to his face, shaking. But the figure sat upright in the canoe, her wet hair clinging to her shoulders. It is I, Abimbola. I did not die. The river spirits took me. They would not let me go. I have been with them these 5 years. Abiola trembled, torn between joy and terror. Spirits? No, this cannot be real. He reached out, touching her hand. It was cold but solid. Tears burst from his eyes. Abimbola, my Abimbola. He pulled her into his arms, sobbing into her shoulder. But Abimbola's embrace was strange, her body both there and not there, her touch fleeting like mist. I cannot stay long, she murmured. The spirits allow me to come only for a short while. The river still holds me. Abiola pulled back, searching her face. Why? Why have they kept you all this time? Why did you not return to me? She sighed and responded, because my work was not finished. The spirits knew I had been wronged. They kept me alive, hidden beneath the river's skin, waiting for the time to reveal the truth. Abiola's chest tightened. What truth? Her eyes lifted, glinting with sorrow and fury. It was not fate that dragged me down. It was Femi, your brother. The words struck like thunder. Abiola shook his head violently. No, Femi wept for you. He has stood by me all these years. He has been my only support. Abimbola's expression hardened. I saw it, Abiola. I felt his hands on me. He pushed me into the deep. He watched me drown. I confronted him about the money he had stolen from us, and for that, he silenced me. If not for the spirits, I would be dust at the bottom of this river. Abiola's breath came fast, his world spinning. No, no, you must be mistaken. But she gripped his wrist with surprising strength. I have watched from beneath, Abiola. I have seen your suffering while he grew fat from your labor. He has continued to steal from you. He smiles in your face while draining your life. Abiola's heart felt as though it would burst. He looked toward the shore, where his brother's house stood somewhere beyond the trees, bright and proud. He remembered the villagers' whispers, the new clothes, the new house, the wealth that had never made sense. Could it all be true? Abimbola's voice softened, carrying both love and sorrow. I came back for you, my husband, to free you from the chains Femi wrapped around you. The river does not forget, and neither do I. Abiola sat frozen in the canoe, his hands trembling, his mind shattering. His wife, alive, yet not alive, had returned from the depths, carrying a truth too heavy to bear. And with the rippling water around them, he knew his life would never be the same again. Denial still held him. Femi was his blood, his elder, the man he had leaned on through every season of grief. The one who carried him when his legs failed from sorrow. Could such a man be a murderer? But Abimbola's gaze left no space for doubt. Her pale fingers tightened around his wrist. Abiola, you know the truth already. You have seen it with your own eyes. Why do you think your nets are always empty while his house grows fat? Why does your belly shrink while his shines with oil? Have you never asked yourself? Abiola's breath quickened, his chest rising and falling as memories flooded him. He remembered the villagers' whispers. He remembered the bright wrappers Femi wore, the house he built while claiming it came from a small side business. He remembered how many times he had returned from fishing with nothing, only to hand over what little he caught, and Femi still lived better than kings. Tears blurred his vision. Suddenly, Abimbola's body shimmered faintly, as if the river called her back. She lifted a trembling hand and pointed to the shoreline. Go to his house. Under the wooden floor, you will find a box. Inside are the stolen monies, the notebooks, all his records. The river showed me. The spirits keep no secrets from those they have chosen. Abiola stared at her, torn between rage and despair. His heart wanted to reject her words, but his soul felt their weight. Slowly he nodded. If what you say is true, I will find it. And if it is true, his voice broke. Then Femi is no longer my brother. Abimbola's expression hardened into something Abiola had never seen before. Femi's hands are stained with blood and greed. And now, the river will demand its price. From that moment, Femi's world began to crumble. His farm, once fertile, began to wither. Yams rotted before they could be harvested. Palm trees refused to give oil. Chickens laid no eggs. Strange accidents plagued him. A section of his fine new roof collapsed in the middle of the night, nearly crushing him. The water in his clay pot turned sour overnight, reeking like spoiled palm wine. Worst of all, sleep deserted him. At night, he tossed on his mat, sweating, his mind replaying Abimbola's drowning again and again. Sometimes, he swore he heard her voice in the wind outside his window, whispering his name, accusing, reminding. He would sit up in the dark, trembling, whispering to himself, it was an accident, but no amount of denial could silence her. The villagers noticed his decline quickly. They whispered at the market stalls, their eyes darting toward his once proud house. Something has touched Femi. His wealth is vanishing like smoke. Meanwhile, Abiola's heart was torn in two. The box of evidence Abimbola spoke of, he found it. Hidden under Femi's wooden floor, just as she said, lay the stolen money, bundles of notes wrapped carefully, and the little brown notebooks filled with records of theft. The truth was undeniable. When Abiola saw it, he fell to his knees, his hands shaking. My own brother, he whispered, choking on his tears. My own blood. Rage burned inside him like fire, but beside it was sorrow so heavy he could barely stand. Meanwhile, Femi was still walking with his chest out, pretending nothing was wrong. But the river had already started eating him alive. His hidden money turned damp and rotten. Coins blackened like charcoal. Notes clung together in soggy lumps, useless. He tried burying them, hiding them in pots, even under his mat, but every hiding place betrayed him. One night, drunk on palm wine, his tongue slipped. Laughing too loud, he muttered about silencing Abimbola and how nobody would ever prove it. The people nearby heard him. By morning, the whole market knew. That was the end. Women spat as he passed. Traders shouted his name with curses. Murderer. Blood thief. His debts piled up, his customers vanished. The same people who once bowed to him now mocked him openly. He staggered through the village muttering to himself, clothes dirty, eyes wild. Children ran when they saw him. Men turned their backs. He was no longer feared, only pitied and despised. Finally, he stopped pretending. He stopped trading, stopped talking. He sat by the river, staring at the black water where it had all begun, his body wasting away. Femi, once the proud man of the market, became a shadow waiting for the river to finish him. Abiola came to the river one last time. And there, rising from the water, was Abimbola. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of all that had happened. It is finished, she said. The river has judged him. Femi has nothing left. His end is near. Abiola bowed his head, torn between sorrow and relief. You have justice now. But what of us, Abimbola? Do you remain here, or do you come home? Abimbola's pale hand touched his cheek, cold as the current. I do not belong to the world of the living anymore. My place is here. My love for you will never die, but my body has. Let me rest. Tears filled Abiola's eyes. His voice broke. Then rest, my wife. Rest in peace. She smiled softly, the smile he had longed to see again. And slowly, she sank back into the river, the ripples fading into stillness. Abiola stood there, alone, but no longer lost. Justice had been served. His wife's spirit was free, and though grief would always sit in his heart, he finally turned his back on the river, ready to live again. That very night, unable to bear the whispers and the haunting, Femi walked into the same river and ended his own life. And sometimes, when the river swelled with rain and the moon lay bright on its surface, the fishermen swore they saw a woman's figure moving just below the water, guiding their canoes away from danger, keeping them from drowning. They would whisper, "It is Abimbola, the wife of Abiola. She watches over us still." And so her story lived on, a tale carried by the river itself.